Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
Someone just joined from the city's phone number. Can you tell me who you are?
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. This is the first time I've been sitting in this room for quite some time, so we're taking a while to get everything exactly the way we want it, but welcome. So I'd like to call to order this sort of virtual regular meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission on Friday, June 11th, 2021. Mr. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bryan.
I am here.
Covington.
Here.
Kaufman.
Here.
Ms. Matcha. Ms. Matcha, you were here a minute ago.
I'm here.
Mr. Strange.
Present.
Ellison.
Here.
Myself and Mr. Trunzo.
All present.
All present.
So the meeting is now in order. I believe it is 1:32 p.m. and a quorum of members are present. So the next step is verification of the meeting notice. Ms. Womack, are you available for that?
She's muted.
Yes, I am, Chair.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
The agenda for the Planning Commission regular meeting was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on June 3rd and was sent out from the portal on June 3rd. It was also amended on June 7th and June 8th. The public notice for the preliminary review Minor Subdivision Application Number 0521-02 for the property located at 63, 65, 67 Lake Avenue was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on May 24th. Notice was published in the Cape Gazette on May 28th and June 1st, Coast Press on June 2nd, and Delaware State News on May 26th and May 27th. Notification specific to this project was mailed to the property owners within 200 feet, and signage was posted on the property. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Womack. Greatly appreciated. The next item is for approval of meeting minutes. We have two sets of meeting minutes for a regular meeting held on May 14th, 2021, and then we had a reconvened regular meeting held on May 18th, 2021. That was solely for the purpose of approving meeting minutes. So I had asked everyone to make it a priority to review these, and thank you for doing those. Does anyone have any comments to either set of meeting minutes? I don't. Mr. Bryan, please.
Mr. Chair, the only comment I have is there was a sentence on page 4 that Attorney Hutt noted that two parcels would not need to be merged, but should a rezoning occur because the use of the parcels would be considered as one parcel. But I believe Mr. Hutt advised at that meeting that in fact this was one parcel with two zonings, a split zoning, and therefore a merger of boundaries would not be necessary. I raised that as a question because my recollection is a little bit different than what I see in the minutes themselves. I think there was some back and forth and some confusion, perhaps on my part, I'm not sure, but I thought Mr. Hutt addressed that differently than we have in the minutes.
Okay, so there's a question about from Mr. Bryan about the parcels. Does anyone have a recollection about that item?
Well, he's correct that it's a split zoning issue, not two parcels, and I think Mr. Hutt did address that. I'm bringing up the minutes now to see how it's done, but Mr. Bryan's recollection is correct that it is a split zoning issue, not two separate parcels.
So,
Mr. Hutt actually is here if we want to ask him what he said to clarify the minutes, should you need to.
the,
Can't hear the solicitor.
Can you hear me now? Better?
Yes.
Okay. What I commented on is that Mr. Bryan is correct that it's a split zoning issue. It's not two parcels. It's one parcel with two different zoning classifications on it. So I'm bringing up the minutes now. I wanted to look myself, but that is, his recollection is correct, and I do believe Mr. Hutt addressed that during the meeting.
so while we're looking at that, I wonder if we could bring Mr. Hutt in, if he wouldn't mind, just confirming what Mr. Mandalis just said is correct, so then we can move forward. Mr. Hutt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am happy to confirm that what Mr. Mandalis said is correct, and that this is a issue of split zoning, not an issue of multiple properties where boundaries would need to be merged. And hopefully that's what I said during the last meeting. That's what I intended to say.
Okay, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate that. So, Mr. Bryan, I think we're going to go with your language. Would you, is everyone in agreement with that correction? And if so, would you like to make a motion?
I would so move to amend the minutes to reflect that there are not two parcels under consideration here, but one parcel with split zoning, two different zonings.
Wonderful. Thank you for your attention to that matter.
Hey,
Is there?
Jeff, I had one comment on the minutes.
Go ahead.
We need to finish the motion first, I think.
I mean, do you want to do these? This is a different comment. Do you want to do these collectively or individually?
Why doesn't Mr. Bryan withdraw his motion, and then we'll hear all the comments, and we can take one motion with all the amendments at one time?
I withdraw my motion at this time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mine's a small comment. It's on page 3 of 5, in the top paragraph. The last sentence in the paragraph says that at that time, I guess referencing when a site plan will come forward, a city planner will be engaged to help manage and advise on the many issues are unique to the redevelopment of the property. Is that a given at this point, or should it be a city planner may be to help manage and advise?
I think it's aspirational, and we should modify that. Does everyone agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What about other comments? I see none. Mr. Bryan, can I go back to you for a new amended motion?
Yes, sir. I would move to amend the minutes as drafted to provide that the application for this rezoning is for concerns one parcel of land with two different zoning categories.
Wonderful. Thank you. How about a second?
And also with the amendment that was just proposed by, I'm not sure who proposed it. Just
Yes, I make that part of my
Mr.
motion
Weber,
as well.
right.
That Mr. Weber's comments be incorporated as well.
Thanks.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second from Mr. Kaufman. Shall we all vote? All in favor of approving the May 14th, 2021 meeting minutes with the amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against or abstentions? Okay, so everybody voted for. And then the May 18th we should handle is a second.
Correct.
Yeah. So then we have the May 18th, and this is the reconvened regular meeting for the purpose of approving the meeting minutes. Does anybody have a comment on these? I see no heads moving. Okay, so there are no comments. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the May 18th reconvened meeting minutes, please?
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Barry.
I'll second.
Okay, and second by Rachel. So all in favor of approving the May 18th, 2021 meeting minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions?
Mr.
One
Chairman,
abstention.
I was not present. I had technical difficulties, so I could not participate, so I would recuse myself from that vote.
Okay, so we have two abstentions, Mr. Ellison and Mr. Bryan,
And Mr. Weber as
and
well.
Mr. Weber. Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. So now we move on to correspondence. Ms. Womack, I know there's a lot of correspondence. Do you have anything else to report?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. So all the correspondence is linked live in the agenda. So before we go, did I hear something? Oh, okay. So before we go on to old business, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our Chief Building Inspector, Matthew Janis, for a moment, and he'd like to do an introduction to everyone. Mr. Janis?
Thank you, Chair. Today, I'm happy to announce that we have hired an assistant building inspector. He's sitting here beside me. I'm going to turn it over to him, let him introduce himself, and if anybody would like to ask a couple questions of him, please certainly feel free to do so.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Corey Shinko, and this is my third week here with the City of Rehoboth. Just a little bit about myself. I come from project management, and I began in the construction industry back when I was 19. I worked with Habitat for Humanity for 3 years, and then I worked in construction since then.
Welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You want to stick around and see how things work? Feel free. I'm sure Matt can appreciate having someone else who knows how
Absolutely.
to report to us.
Absolutely.
We're glad you're here. And one other housekeeping item. I know folks like to know where they are on the speaker list, so I'll read the names in order, just so when we get to the public comments points, people know how their names will come up. So I have Mr. Hutt, Mr. Carlton Savage, Sarub Srivastava, Hal Dukes, Alexis Gadd, Susan Crampton Davis, John Dewey, and Russell Keys. So 8 people have signed up in that order. Thanks. So we're going to move on to old business now, which is item 6A, the recommendation to the Board of Commissioners for a change of zone request for 330 Rehoboth Avenue. I want to make a few comments before we get started and then turn it over to the folks that are here, the applicants that are here. So I wanted to make clear that this is a continuation of the agenda item discussed during the May 14th meeting. The applicant requested to come before us again this month, and the PC invited them to do so. I would like to remind everyone of the history of this item, and I invite Mr. Hutt to comment, verify the history is correct after I state it. So this item starts on January 11th, 2019. Limitless Development came before the PC for a concept review. It included a recommendation from the PC to consider seeking a change of zoning for the R1 portion of the property. On June 7th, 2019, Limitless submitted a change of zoning application to the Board of Commissioners. On July 19th, 2019, the Board of Commissioners referred the matter to the PC. On August 9th, 2019, the PC undertook consideration of the change of zoning. An objection came from the owner of the property at the time, and the PC voted to delay consideration until the lawsuit is resolved. I either made that motion or seconded it, I can't remember, but I remember Mr. Perry and I on the end discussing we were not ready to move ahead. On March 5th, 2021, Mr. Hutt notified the PC that the ownership of the property is resolved to 330 Hospitality Group LLC, and they would like to resume consideration of the zoning request with the PC. And on May 14th, 2021, the last meeting, the zoning change recommendation was considered by the PC, and of course, we had public testimony at that time. So, as this record shows, the matter was considered at the May 14th meeting as re-engagement of the rezoning recommendation matter previously deferred. I was asked at the meeting of the 14th whether or not this was a new application, and I answered that question incorrectly in the record, out of concern about the amount of time which had passed. With these remarks today, I'm correcting the record that the change of zoning request is a continuation of the July 19th, 2019 referral by the Board of Commissioners to the Planning Commission. So, Mr. Hutt, if you'd like to add anything, or if there's any questions from the PC before we continue, let's hear from them now. I don't see any questions from the PC. Mr. Hutt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I believe that history accurately reflects what I have as the history of this matter from the conceptual review through the filing of the application for the change of zone.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks, everybody. So, Mr. Hutt, are you ready to? I noticed you let me know that you had some slides. Are you able to project those things, or do we need to assist you today?
I believe I'm going to try to see if this works.
Okay, we'll bear with you. We're all getting back to normal here. It looks like it is working. There you go.
Very good. If everybody can see those, Mr. Chairman, are you ready for me to proceed?
We are ready for you to proceed, and we can see it on the screen. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. So the record is clear. I know I've spoken several times already, but for the record, my name is David Hutt. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Morris James, and I'm representing 330 Hospitality Group LLC, which, as Mr. Trunzo just indicated in his history, is the current owner of the property as the ownership was resolved. With me this afternoon, hopefully you can see them on the screen, are two of the principals of the entities, which are the members of 330 Hospitality Group. On my right, I suppose that'd be your left, is Don Lockwood, and on my left, I think your right, is Betty Gallo. First, thank you to the commission for putting this item back on the agenda this afternoon. And I thought it would be helpful this time to have some visual references, which is why I'm sharing the screen with the imagery that you see. I often think that it's hard to talk about tax parcels and land use matters in the abstract. And very quickly, just to help orient everybody, although I'm sure no orientation is necessary on the slide, at the top of the screen, the highway that you would see there, or the road, would of course be Rehoboth Avenue. And the roadway that goes into that road is, of course, State Road. It's difficult on the screen that I'm looking at, but there is a red box that outlines this tax parcel. And as you can see, this tax parcel, as it's outlined in red, does have two zoning classifications. There is the sort of goldenish color or yellow color along Rehoboth Avenue. That would, of course, be the commercial portion of the property. And then you see what appears to be I'll call it a purple. I'm not sure what color it is on the actual zoning map, but looks like it's, which is the residential portion of the property as well. This map serves several purposes. Of course, in addition to outlining the various tax parcels in this area, it also the zoning map, which I just reviewed a little portion of, but it also contains aerial imagery underneath those various layers. So you can see the existing building on the site. You can see the parking You can see the condominium units that form Scarborough Village, specifically Building 6 is the one that's closest to the existing building. And then, of course, you can see the single-family lots that make up parts of Country Club Estates at the State Road portion of the property. At the last meeting in May, I reviewed the history of this matter in some detail, and I'm certainly not going to repeat that information, and Mr. Trunzo just did a good job of summarizing that information. Instead, this afternoon, I wanted to update the commission on a few things, describe the work that my clients have put some of their professionals to in the interim, and hopefully address some questions that arose during the last meeting. Before I go down that specific path, I did want to go back to what the goal of this process was, or is. Since 2019 and the initial conceptual review meeting that we had with the Planning Commission on January 11th of 2019, the goal of this process has been to seek a change of zone. That was the consensus of the Planning Commission in January of 2019, was that it would be better to seek a change of zone for the residential portion to commercial, rather than to seek a series of variances for this property and the proposed hotel use. As was discussed during the last meeting, certainly this reflects not only the beauty and simplicity of having one zoning classification for a property, but it also represents sound land use planning, as the law refers to split zoning as being haphazard and something to be avoided. And of course, I know that Mr. Janis is with us today. I'm sure that it would make it difficult on him and his department to attempt to apply the zoning code and the building code to this property, as of course, not only are the uses different, as we discussed the last time, there are certainly different setbacks, the FAR amounts, all of the various components that go into evaluating a use on a property, and ultimately how something is constructed and developed would differ between these two areas on the property and present a number of challenges, not just to the applicant, but of course also to the city itself.
Excuse me, Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Womack.
I'm hearing a lot of feedback when Attorney Hutt is speaking. Is there a second device that has volume on?
Mr. Hutt, were you able to hear that? Maybe if you have multiple devices, maybe the other ones should be muted. We also heard the feedback here, but we could hear you as well.
I do not believe I have multiple devices on, but let me see. Did that help?
Keep talking. I think it is better.
Let's see. Well, hopefully that helped to change that.
That's much better.
Thank you so much.
Great. There was another device on that I didn't know was on, so thank you for letting me know. This afternoon, I wanted to briefly address three primary items to summarize several of the takeaways from the last meeting. First, I wanted to go back over the history of the property, and I'll explain the significance of that when I do that, but I think there's some good information. I continue to look at the history of this property, and some good information was discovered. The second item that I wanted to review was the site plan considerations. There was a great amount of discussion the last time regarding the site plan. And so I wanted to go over some of those considerations in a little more detail. And then the last item I wanted to discuss was a proposed restrictive covenant. That was something, again, that was discussed during the last meeting. I wanted to review that with the commission this afternoon, the progress that was made in that regard. The first of the topics that I mentioned a moment ago is the history of the property. And this is a common question both at the last meeting and frankly through all the meetings that have happened beginning in 2019. And it's a common question whenever you have something like this, is how did the split zoning arise? As I mentioned at the last meeting, through some title research, what's been discovered is that the property actually consists of it contains two of the principal landmark projects within the city, but also has a third area that's between those two areas. And the two significant or landmark projects or surveys in the city that I'm referring to, one of those is, of course, the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association, and the other is Country Club Estates. The next slide that I have on the screen is this tax parcel. You can see it outlined there with various highlights and cross-hatching. And this hopefully is a better visual demonstration of what I have been attempting to explain. As you can see along Rehoboth Avenue, and again, Rehoboth Avenue is at the top of the image. The area highlighted in yellow is, of course, a portion of this tax parcel that we're talking about, and that is part of the original Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. The green highlighted triangle skipping to the bottom of this tax parcel is an interesting triangle of land that exists on the Country Club Estates plot that was first for Section 3. And I say it's an interesting portion because, as you can see, as it was laid out, that lot would have had no frontage on a public street or highway. The red crosshatched area between the two highlighted parcels it lies between those two projects, between Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association and the area of Country Club Estates. In a moment, we'll look at a plot, and you'll see that that area was titled in the name of Eastern Shore Public Utility, which through several name changes became known as Delmarva Power. And of course, ultimately, the entire area that is colored in on that tax map became part of what was the horse and buggy, and then the seahorse, and then all the other various uses that I described during the last meeting. What is on the screen, and I certainly apologize for the quality of it, but anybody who's done any title work in Sussex County will know that this is part of the original plot for the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. And due to its frequency of use over the years, these are about the best images you can get of that original plot for the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. Rehoboth Avenue is the line that runs from left to right, down towards the bottom. And you can see I have written in State Road, which was Old Bay Road on some of the prior plots. And as you can see, the interesting thing here is that State Road, what we now know as State Road, on this plat was not shown as connecting to Rehoboth Avenue. Again, I've highlighted on the plot the area that is part of the tax parcel we're here today. So you can see these lots along Rehoboth Avenue, and then the lots that were removed for State Road. And this is in the upper right-hand corner. I've included the recording information from the Recorder of Deeds. The original plot begins in plot book or deed book 84 and at page 602. This next image is, again, a recorded document from the Recorder of Deeds. And this is, again, I've highlighted on this document the parcel that we're here about, or a portion of the parcel. As you can see, this is Section 3 of Country Club Estates. At the very bottom of the highlighted area is that triangular portion that does not have access to a public street or road. And then right above that, and I don't know how well it shows up on your screen, you can see that the owner of the property is identified to the north of that triangle, is identified as Eastern Shore Public Utility. And that's the utility I just referenced a moment ago that became known as Delmarva Power through some name changes. I point out this history for a couple of reasons, but primarily because this still remains the most logical explanation as to how the property became split zoned. As you can see from this history, we're talking about two different originating plots for this, with a piece of land that was owned by a utility in between those. And all of those various pieces of land were joined probably approximately 40 or 50 years ago. There was testimony or statements by a planning commission member about remembering this configuration of the property as being more than 47 years, his 47 years in Sussex County and in the city of Rehoboth Beach. But not only is this significant because of how it probably is one of the best explanations for how the split zoning situation arose, but it also addresses one of the themes of some of the emails and letters of individuals who have written to the Planning Commission regarding this application. One of the themes of those is that a rezoning of this property sets a dangerous precedent for the city, that residential properties all over the city will then be more likely to be rezoned as commercial property because this will set that precedent. As the commission knows, zoning decisions are unique to a piece of property. And so at the very first initial base level, I would say that legally, this is not a precedential setting decision in that instance. But more importantly, I certainly understand the practical concerns of anyone that once one property is rezoned, it might open the door for others. And that's why this history of the property and how this arose, I think, is significant. Assuming that a precedent was established, just for the sake of argument this afternoon, I think that precedent would be of little meaning for the reasons that I just explained when I walked through the history of the property, as it's extremely unlikely that there's another property in the city that would be, in the legal terms, on all fours with the precedent and the history that I just referenced, as it'd be unlikely that there'd be a property that was used in this commercial fashion for 50 years, which was the joining of three land masses, one from something like the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association, one from Country Club Estates, or even one from Rehoboth Heights, and then a portion of a property that was owned by a utility company in between those two uses. For those reasons, that any precedent would certainly be, the Planning Commission would have a good response to the individual say, well, you're not exactly like the last situation, or even closely similar to that situation, I would guess at that time. The second item that I wanted to address this afternoon, in addition to providing that history, is the site plan considerations that went into the initial concept that the Planning Commission reviewed in January of 2019, and then even some updating and an alternate concept that you'll see in a moment here. As was discussed at the last meeting of the zoning, the Planning Commission, this present change of zone application is not a site plan review. However, it's a universal condition, regardless of whether you're on a planning commission, whether you are a land use attorney, whether you're a resident and part of the public, that whenever a change of zone application occurs, the first question that gets asked is, what's intended for the property? What's the intended use of the property? During the discussion with the Planning Commission at the last meeting, several commission members asked this very question, and that is, of course, what did the property owner intend to do as far as the redevelopment of this property should the change of zone be allowed? At that time, I reaffirmed the owner's goal of this, which is the hotel plan that was submitted as a concept in January of 2019. It was called on that plan, the Rehoboth Grand. And if you went back and looked at that plan or had a chance to in the interim, you would have seen that that's a 90-room hotel with commercial uses that are proposed as a spa, a restaurant, and a small retail area on the first floor. There's also underground parking and parking, of course, at ground level where it exists presently on the site. Specifically, the next slide that hopefully you can see on your screens is a copy of the site plan that was presented in January of 2019. And we didn't walk through this the last time, and I'm certainly not going to go through the entirety of the site plan this afternoon, as that's not the purpose of the meeting. But I did want to describe why the building was laid out in this manner, and then describe another feature of the building which I think addresses some concerns that members of the Planning Commission and public expressed. The first is the layout of the site. And as you can see, the layout of the site keeps the intense business use largely as it has historically been and would continue that. As you can see, my primary portions of the hotel are located in the C1 or commercial area of the site, with the parking being in what is the residentially zoned portion of the property along State Road. This is important not only because it's consistent with the historic half-century use of the property, but this configuration also makes sense as it keeps the more intense use of the property along Rehoboth Avenue, which is, of course, the city's primary commercial corridor. When you look at the site plan, the second item that I wanted to highlight this afternoon is you can see the rear property line off of Rehoboth Avenue. And I'm not sure if my cursor shows up on the screens or not, but thank you. I'm going over that property line now with the cursor. And of course, what lies behind this is, of course, the Scarborough Village condominiums. And what I wanted to highlight was one of the design elements beginning in January of 2019 and would continue to be that way, is this area between the rear boundary line of this site and the actual building for the proposed hotel. The distance between that rear boundary line and the back of the hotel is 15 feet as it's shown on the site plan. As you can see, that would be 15 feet, and I'm going to show you, go to the next slide. This is the current survey of this property. As you can see, the outline of the current building, and it's probably too small on anybody's screen, but the setback from the rear property line to the building is just over 1 feet. I believe it's 1.3 feet if you were to zoom in carefully on that. And of course, this is one of the considerations that the property owner at that time, again, the property owner was a long-term tenant and now is the property owner, but they wanted to pull the building off of that rear property line where this commercial area abuts the residential area of Scarborough Village. And no doubt what this building that's here is certainly taller and consumes more height than the existing building. However, there would be an additional 14 feet of separation between Scarborough Village and this building as shown on this site plan. As the commission likely is aware, in the C1 zoning district, there is essentially what amounts to a 0-foot setback from property boundary lines, except for there's a requirement in the zoning code that when a commercial use abuts a residential use, there's a 5-foot rear yard required with a screen. And as you recall, there certainly was more than ample room on the prior site plan that was presented in January of 2019 to accommodate that 5-foot area. And in fact, it's triple that area between the property boundary line and the building. From the date of our last meeting in May to now, the property owner sat down with their architect and asked for another potential concept for the building. And that is what is shown here on this slide. And I can see it's a little too large for the screen, but hopefully we can get it there. And again, on this rear property line, we've now identified more specifically some of these dimensions. The first dotted line is the 5-foot area that I just mentioned that's required in the zoning code when a commercial property abuts a residential property. The next dotted line is a 10-foot building setback. And then you have the building itself, which sits 15 feet off of the property line. And the 10-foot building setback there, you're probably wondering what that is, since I just mentioned that the zoning code has a 0 setback requirement, except for the 5-foot in the rear yard. And that's the perfect segue to my third point this afternoon, which is the restrictive covenant that the property owner proposes as part of this. And that restrictive covenant would be that if the property is used for a hotel, a motel, or an inn, and those are terms from the zoning code that describe this use in the C1 area. But if during the next 40 years, the property is used for a hotel, a motel, or an inn, the property owner would self-impose a 10-foot rear yard setback. You're likely asking yourself, why would it be a 10-foot setback when you just mentioned that the building was 15 feet from the property line? And the reason for this is fairly simple and straightforward, I hope, which is when you look at the site plan, whether it's the revised concept or the original one from January of 2019, you can see there's a corner of the building here where the property line goes back at a 90-degree angle. And this portion of the building is not 15 feet from the property line, but is instead 11 feet from the property line. And so, we could run into this everywhere where there is an angle or a corner on the property. And so rather than have a very complex arrangement trying to describe various bends and turns on the property, it seems simpler to have propose a restrictive covenant of a rear yard setback of 10 feet, and then actually have the building be able to come in well within that. And of course, this certainly reflects the age-old adage about under-promising and over-delivering, because that would allow the property owner to have a restrictive covenant of 10, but then be able to ultimately have site plans more consistent with the 15 feet for the overwhelming majority of the building. As you can see, I don't know what the percentage of the building is, but the vast majority of the building would be at 15 feet with only a portion of the building where it angles back because of the 90-degree bend in the property line there. In looking at this concept, again, this is another conceptual possibility that keeps the building along Rehoboth Avenue and the parking along State Road as it currently exists. This concept has parking right here as one enters, and then to the right. And of course, the underground parking in this concept would then, the ramp for it would be towards the rear of the property. And a person would come off of State Road. There would be locations here to check in. But then if they weren't able to park in the parking lot here, they could certainly go down to the underground parking towards the rear of the property line there. Those are the three items that I wanted to bring the Planning Commission up to date on this afternoon. And the question before the Planning Commission, as I circle back to where we began this afternoon, the question is whether it's appropriate for this property, which the comprehensive development plan for the city indicates lies along the two entry streets. That's how the comprehensive development plan describes State Road and Rehoboth Avenue as the city's two entry streets. The question again is whether it's appropriate for this property, which lies on these two streets, to have one homogeneous zoning classification, and that classification being the C1 commercial zoning classification. That is all the additional information that I have this afternoon. Myself and my clients are certainly available to answer any questions that members of the Planning Commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hutt. We appreciate that very much. Could I just ask one question before I open it to the rest of the PC for questions? Is the section with the porte cochere in the parking, the current residential section, is that revised since the concept review? It looks a little different, but I'm not remembering exactly. It seems like there's more underground parking now than there was before. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct. And I'll try to toggle back and forth between the two. I don't know how well that will work. You can see that the parking went around the perimeter of the site, and the ramp to get to the underground parking was in this area here. And so what has been done on this revised concept, again, largely keeping the parking where it was, there is no more perimeter parking all along Country Club Estates. Instead, the parking ramp was moved to the back of the property, and there would be more room for underground parking in this area, as well as, of course, under the hotel itself. And so this is essentially at grade parking, which used to surround the perimeter of the site. And one of the things this allowed us to do, and I'm glad you asked the question, Mr. Trunzo, is we have shown on here, again, continuing that 5-foot rear yard setback that's required when a commercial use abuts a residential property. And we've also shown, of course, the 10-foot rear yard setback here as well. And we've maintained that. I know one of the concerns that was referenced during the last Planning Commission hearing was equitably treating all of the various individuals who surround this property, whether it be the individuals in the Scarborough townhomes, which are along here, or the single family homes and Country Club Estates that are in this general area. And this is an attempt with even that restrictive covenant to have the same general setback. And of course, the code requires the 5 feet, but then to have the same 10-foot setback along all of those lines, treating all of those properties the same.
Wonderful. Thanks for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure I was interpreting that correctly. Shall we go to members of the Planning Commission for questions now? And let me adjust my view because I'm not seeing everybody yet.
We need to go back to,
Get the
Yeah.
display off the screen.
Okay, so
That needs
I'm,
to remove the presentation, unfortunately.
yeah, let's take down the presentation and then, okay, full grid, I'm back. Thank you so much. Okay, so one more time, members of the Planning Commission. I see Mr. Strange, and I think I see Mr. Bryan. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Ed, I have a whole series of questions, but to the point of that one drawing that you just had up there, where you show the building continuing along State Road, it seems to indicate, although there is at-level parking, that the physicality of the building continues for more than 3/4 of the property in that direction. Is that correct? Because it's showing wall sections all the way through.
The building does move further down along a state road. That is a lower portion of the building, Mr. Strange, but yes, the building would move then further down, a little bit further down on State Road at that time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bryan?
Yes, Mr. Hutt, can you just historically tell us when the residential parcel was zoned residential?
I do not know the answer to when that zoning classification was placed on the property. My research hasn't shown that as far as when the residential portion was zoned residential or when that lot, the in-between lot, I'll call it, that was owned by the utility was zoned residential. We have not been able to determine that piece of information.
Yeah, that's the one I'm particularly interested in, just how that came to be residential if it's owned by a commercial entity. But to your knowledge, it's been used, and its use has not changed over how long? How many years?
At least half a century that it has been in that configuration and used as parking, whether it was a restaurant, whether it was an office complex. It's been used for several offices, but also several restaurants, more notoriously, of course, the Seahorse.
The rear 15-foot setback buffer, the combination of the 5-foot green space and the 10-foot setback, is there anticipated that there would be any traffic movement along that area behind that building?
One thing I wanted to clarify is that the 10-foot would include the 5-foot rear yard setback that the code requires. So I don't have the image up on the screen, but the building would be 15 feet off. There would be the 5-foot rear yard setback that's required, and then the building has an additional 10 feet. The restrictive covenant that's proposed is limited to 10 feet so that all the corners and such don't fall within the 15 feet. There is a sidewalk that was shown on the one site plan, so there could be pedestrian usage back there, but there would not be physical or vehicular traffic, rather, behind that building.
Yeah, my concern was whether or not you would have deliveries going to the rear of the building for the restaurants and that type thing. And that's the reason for my question.
Understood, and that is not the intention or goal or design that's shown there.
Now, you have proposed a restrictive covenant as to setback. Have you made any progress or decision about the use of the property so that it doesn't become a gas station or some other permitted use under the commercial district?
No other restrictive covenant is being proffered at this time. A lot of time and money has been spent on the plans for the hotel, and certainly I think to your question, the ultimate end of your question, if another property owner were to purchase the property, certainly anything that's allowed in the C1 zoning classification would ultimately be a permitted use. But the property owners are pretty excited about the opportunity of bringing the Rehoboth Grand to life at the entrance to Rehoboth. And so that's why the restrictive covenant was focused on the hotel, motel, or in use and the rear yard setback that they'd be willing to commit to.
Okay, but no restriction saying this is for a hotel use only.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Covington.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. I was asked the same question concerning restrictive covenant. I would like for you to consider having a restrictive covenant in which that parking lot, if this were to be rezoned from residential commercial, that area that's being used for parking not be used for a commercial site other than for off-street parking. So something for you to consider.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Covington. Mr. Kaufman, please.
First, I had a few questions, and then I have a few observations. My first question, Mr. Hutt, how much underground parking is it? Is it one or two floors of underground parking? Is it just one?
It is one floor of underground parking. Yes, sir.
Okay, and I noticed that the current building, which is right on the property line on the commercial side, is only 1.5 stories. How many stories and how tall will the proposed hotel be?
It's ultimately 4 stories, and I believe the height limit in this C1 zoning district is 42 feet. Mr. Janis could correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be 42 feet at its highest point.
So it's probably more than double the height of the existing building, even though you have a 15-foot setback.
That is correct.
Couple of observations. Even though the residential piece is zoned residential, it was used by a utility company, which is analogous to commercial. Surface parking has also been there for many, many years, and that's analogous to commercial. So for all intents and purposes, the use of the residential piece has been essentially either commercial or related to commercial. I don't know what the utility people had on there. Did they have a substation, or do we know what they had on there?
I do not know, and for all we know, it may have just been owned by them until more than half a century ago when it was sold to the individuals who operated the restaurants there originally.
Also, I appreciate the setback. I appreciate your willingness to do a covenant, but I don't think the covenant is adequate as currently proposed. I agree with Mr. Covington that one way to address it would be to put a covenant, a permanent covenant on the parking area So even if a different commercial use was used on the rest of it, it would be parking, and I'd like you to consider that. The other possible way is for you to use the covenant you have, but for the first 5 years to covenant that the property would only be used as a hotel or some period similar to that. So in my mind, if you got this zoning and you went right ahead, it would be somewhere between 2 and 5 years that you would get this hotel up. So those are my initial comments. I want to hear what the other planning commissioners have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Anyone else? Ms. Macha?
Steve, were you suggesting that there was a time limit on how long it would take to build a hotel? I didn't catch your last comment there, sorry.
Rachel, I couldn't
wasn't
quite.
suggesting there'd be a time limit, but I was suggesting that they, for a period of time after the rezoning, that if the property were developed, it would only be developed as a hotel.
Oh, got it, okay.
Rachel, can you repeat that? We couldn't hear you inside the room. If you could get closer, maybe?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I could.
That's better.
Okay, good. I was just asking for clarification on Steve's last comment. That's
Okay.
all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weber and then Mr. Strange.
I have a question. It's kind of it's partially for the city solicitor. We talked about this last time, but procedurally, I guess what the planning commission is being asked to make a recommendation to the board of commissioners on the rezoning. We're kind of digging into the details, building development itself to use as background information for that recommendation. But the plan would come back as part of the site plan review process. But at this point, other than a voluntary deed restriction of some type, we don't really, the property could be rezoned and we have no guarantee at all as to what may go on there. I'm not suggesting that the applicant's going to do anything different, but in theory, one could come in with a totally different plan for site plan approval after the property is zoned. And I guess it's that whole quandary of the chicken and the egg of zoning it and what goes on there. And is that true, Glenn, that we don't?
Yeah, all of that is
of a voluntary deed restriction. We can't put any conditions at all on the rezoning of the property.
That's correct. It would come back to the planning commission on a site plan review. Any project of this magnitude would come before the planning commission. But once the rezoning occurs, should it occur, short of some deed restriction or some other legal mechanism, any of the permitted uses in the commercial district would be permissible on that parcel.
Okay, and that kind of brings me to my second part of the comment. That I feel like, or I feel the same as some others that have spoken, Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Covington, about thinking about some kind of encompassing restriction with respect to the parking, because in using that, the residential portion is parking. But I think it's also important to remember that by rezoning the residential, and since we don't have the full plan in front of us, there is a significant amount of increase in density that would go along with that, somewhere in the neighborhood of 28.
Can't hear him.
Area, buildable floor area.
Mr. Weber, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you go back maybe 15 seconds? You cut out for a little bit.
Sure. My concern is that even if there's a covenant that only parking will occur on the currently residentially zoned portion, that by rezoning it from residential to commercial, there will be an additional, say, 28,000 feet of floor area that will be permitted on the site, which I assume in theory is being allocated to the portion of the site where the hotel will be built. And we talked about equity of the homeowners behind the site, whereas some that live behind the parking lot will say, well, this is great, it's going to continue as parking. But those that live behind the commercial building say, well, geez, great, we're getting another 28,000 feet of floor area, put adjacent to us. And I'm just bringing that up as a concern. I don't know that I have a position on how to deal with it, but those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Weber. Mr. Strange, I think you were next.
Yes, Jeff, actually, I have a procedural question. In terms of how we're going to be proceeding. At the moment, we're just having a dialogue, entertaining questions for Mr. Hutt to answer. And then I assume that we're going to hear from the public, and then we're going to have a much more in-depth dialogue on the issues related to this as to whether it's a good or a bad or recommended to go forward, or am I getting that sequence out of order?
Well, so the way the agenda has been prepared, there was an applicant presentation. We didn't know what we were going to see, so we've received some new information. We do have public comments later in the agenda, and I do have citizen comments specifically for the new business item, but not for this one. So
Okay.
you raise an issue that I was going to raise a little bit, is that there's a significant, I think there's a significant amount of new information here. I think other people agree. We're getting interesting questions, different than we got in May. And we could have some deliberation now, but we do not have a venue for public comment specifically on this at the time of our deliberation, if that answers the question.
I have a series of observations, and I think it might be beneficial for Mr. Hutt and his team, based on the perspectives of zoning and things related to it, but I don't know if I should go into that at this point or wait till we have a further dialogue.
Well, I think most folks have spoken, and just to preview, for deliberation, I think the issue we should discuss is, whether we see a path forward, and we would want to come to near a decision, or at the next meeting have one more discussion, or if we don't see a path forward, and then in that case, that would also be a decision. But I think it'd be beneficial to hear your list. Let's get it all out there today.
Okay. I think it's far more complex than what has been presented from a land use and planning perspective, and has multiple issues related to it. And one of them is intensity of use, historical intensity of use, and where the intensity use is going to go, and the expectation of people both in the commercial district and in the residential district. And from our requirements of what we're required to do as a planning commission, as chartered by the state and by the city. And I have to read some of this specifically, because unfortunately I'm not that good anymore at remembering, but under Delaware Code Title 22, and in our own Building and Zoning Code, Chapters 3 and 7, our mission is to evaluate present and future needs and the general public welfare of the jurisdiction's residents with regard to the health, safety, prosperity, and general public welfare, and secure from safety, fire, panic, and other dangers, promote the health and general welfare. And then it goes into much more excruciating detail as to what those characteristics are that are manifest in zoning that we have to deal with. And in particular, I'd like to refer to Chapter 236-30 under site plan review and the general purposes of that site plan review. And it says protection of the architectural, massing, composition, scale, and character of the neighborhood, not just this particular property that is being requested, whether it requires a rezoning or not, and the compatibility of the new construction and existing scale and character of nearby properties, preservation of streetscapes, preservation of natural resources, and protection of the public's health and safety and general welfare. Then there's 21 specific things that we have to consider, not of which I think are appropriate at the moment to discuss. But I think it's very important in terms of intensity of use with regard to this property. As was mentioned earlier, and I think, there's a few people that go back further than me. But as of 1977, at least for 44 years, I know factually, personally, that's been used as a parking lot area adjacent to the Seahorse. And for some number of years before that, when it previously, it used to be a golf course, Country Club Estates, and then it converted over. And part of that is zoned commercial and part of it residential. However, all those folks who eventually bought homes in that area, the intensity of use was such that I'm not sure they even thought about what was zoned C1 or CX or whatever it might be, or R1, R2, or R3. And then the development evolved in the way that it did. But for the last almost 50 years, that area that is parking has been perceived essentially a low intensity of use. And the prospective recommendations for the commercial activity, it's a 24/7 activity with the hotel. So the intensity of use is going to change on that piece of the property. I concur and agree with everyone else that split zoning is not a good idea. However, we use geometric zoning, Euclidean zoning that we have, as opposed to form zoning. And when you have that type of zoning, you end up with these difficult situations. So you have moral hazard on both parties. The folks who bought in Country Club Estates and in the surrounding area and the vertical residences, there was absolutely no guarantee that what was on the C1 zones would stay what they were, that the Seahorse might go away and a 42-foot hotel might go up on the commercially zoned property. There was an anticipation, however, from an historical perspective, that the lower density use of the portion of the property that was used commercially, but was in fact zoned residentially, would remain as low density of use because there was no indication that it would be otherwise. The rezoning that's being requested would essentially take the moral hazard that was strictly for the folks that previously were adjoining the commercial section and now extend it to everybody in the residential area that were abutting against the parking area that was zoned residential, but was used commercially. And that is something I think that has to be taken into consideration. The current owners of the property, although they're great people, and I happen to know one individual for some 30 years, not personally, but through her various endeavors, and they used to rent our properties for us. But I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. It's just that that's what they would like to do from a commercial perspective. But that's a moral hazard that they face. When they purchased these properties, they knew of the split zoning at the time. And if they didn't, they should have. So that's a moral hazard that they face. The property owners on the other side, in the residential areas, when they purchased those properties, they knew they were adjacent to a commercial property, and so that's their moral hazard. So we can't now take, I think, and it is my opinion, and increase, if you will, the risks that they faced when the risks were of their own under their own doing. So we're left with somewhat of a dilemma, in my opinion. I do not think it's as easy a situation as has been portrayed to flip this and convert it to commercial zoning, even with some of the restrictions that the applicants have indicated they might be willing to offer. I think the issue is larger than that. And I think the intensity of use is a very, very critical aspect of this. In order to be used within the existing zoning structure, it may require some redesign or reuse or reapplication to have it work better. And that's, I guess, I'll shut up at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strange. Mr. Kaufman, before we go to you and Ms. Macha, the city solicitor has slipped me a corrective note about the procedure. Apparently, I do have more power than I think, and I can call for citizen comments on this topic at any time. So I'd like to hear from everybody on the PC, and then I know we have one in the room and at least two online. And I'd like to hear how the public reacts to today's discussion if nobody's opposed to doing that. Super. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Kaufman.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, with all due respect to Michael Strange, it's well settled law that you do not have a perpetual right to a zoning classification. It can be changed.
Absolutely. Right.
Secondly, just because something may change doesn't mean it can't be compatible with existing uses. That's very clear. A lot of it depends on what the project and site plan say and how buffers are provided. One of my own personal feelings is that I'm very much against variances. They're very arbitrary, hit and miss. I much prefer to have a zoning class with sufficient standards in it to provide both for an applicant and also to protect the surrounding community. The thing that is troubling me, and I want to go back to this to Mr. Hutt, is, and I can say this, and I'll say it after the public speaks. I'm not prepared to go forward with a proposal for yes or no without a better covenant that guarantees for some period that if this is rezoned, that for some period it will come in as a hotel and not one of these myriad uses in the commercial zone. Lacking that, I couldn't vote for it or against it. I would recommend that we not make a recommendation. That's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Covington. Ms. Macha, I believe you were next?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I would just like to say I concur with everything that Steve said. And the other thought that I had, Mike, as you were talking, again, with all due respect, is, you know, this is a property that is really, I don't want to say abandoned, but we're really not using it today, right? In a manner that it had been used for in the past and it was thriving. So I worry about the risk here of not doing something or allowing, you know, a commercial property here, because I want to make sure that we're thinking about the fact that we want Rehoboth, right, to have that progress. And I get it. There's a lot of different areas here we still have to discuss and look at the plans and make sure it's code compliant. And there's a lot here yet that is down the road. But I would like us just to be thoughtful about the fact that we just don't want a property sitting here that's not in use either.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Macha. Mr. Ellison.
Yeah, I'm new at all of this, but I tend to agree with everything that Mike Strange said. That is, you know, you really need to take a look at the entire scale and massing of the neighborhood. And here we have a neighborhood that is, aside from the frontage right on Rehoboth Avenue, is fundamentally residential. And even the portion of the property that is zoned residential is basically almost entirely surrounded by residential. It only connects to the C1 in one little area. But I really tend to agree. He says that there's a dilemma. I guess I don't have quite that level of dilemma. If I heard our city solicitor at the last meeting, in fact, he said that zoning should not be linked to a specific project concept. And he also said that the PC should not put a condition on a zone. And I would assume that that would also attend to the term covenant. If that is the case, and that would be his guidance, then to me, this is crystal clear. I cannot be in favor of rezoning, just simply because we don't know what could happen to that piece. Yes, it's been used as parking for years, but with the rezoning, I don't know what could happen. But I think that in all fairness to all those residential properties who surround that current residential piece of the property. We need to be fair and consider their interests as well as the interests of the owners of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison.
Mr. Chair, may I weigh in on that?
Oh, please.
So I wanted to comment that I did say last time that a change in zone or a recommendation on changing a zone should not be linked to any specific design or any project, particular project, because it is true that any use that's permitted within the zoning classification could at some point be how that property is ultimately developed. And I also said that you should not place a condition on a change of zone. That's just practice that is inconsistent with land use law. However, it's not entirely unheard of for an applicant to make some sort of proffer, such as a deed covenant or deed restriction, that would allow a planning commission to feel a little bit more comfortable about recommending a certain change in zone. So that practice occurs, and there's nothing there's nothing illegal or impermissible about that. So I'm a little bit more comfortable when an applicant makes a proffer and the planning commission accepts that proffer. I would never get comfortable with the planning commission placing a condition on a change of zone, for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Does anybody have any questions, further questions, or can we go to the public? Go ahead, Mr. Covington.
Yeah, just one. I'm going back and forth on this, and I respect Mr. Coughlin's comment about variances, but this seems to me more and more looking like the proper procedure is to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for a variance. That way you don't change the zoning, they get usage of it. You don't have to worry about what's going to happen 20 years from now. As long as they're using it as a hotel and for parking, it might solve the issue. So anyway, something to think about.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Covington. So, Max, I'm going to go to the public, and according to my list, it would be in this order: Mr. Srivastava, Mr. Dewey, who's in the room, and Mr. Keys. Can we try Mr. Srivastava and see if he's ready? You're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Go ahead.
Okay. You're probably tired of seeing me. I've been in front of you a couple of times. And our concerns remain the same. But based on what you're looking at right now, the biggest concern I have is the fact that even if you agree with this rezoning based on the sketch plan that's been submitted, the developer, owner, or future owner is not bound to that plan. And therefore, it could be developed in any way that a commercial zoning would allow. And that is a big concern. So unless, and I've heard from the attorney that maybe you cannot restrict them to a certain way of developing it, but unless we can do that, I don't see how we could accept that. Well, of course, when I say accept that, we accept what you do. But the other thing is, once this property is rezoned, what is going to keep the commission from allowing rezoning of other residential properties? I live in Building 6 of Scarborough Village, and I have spoken to all the residents of that building, and I don't know if you've heard from them. I encourage them to get in touch with you individually, because we were told that the community as a whole was not going to take a position, and we were just on our own basically to do. And so from what I've heard from talking to these people, they are all opposed to this rezoning. We would just like to see it stay the way it is. And one solution, if I may, is, I know this is one property right now, but it could be split in two properties, and the residential area could be developed residentially, and the commercial area could be developed commercially. That's always an option. So the one thing granting variances as opposed to rezoning would do, it would actually put restrictions that the owner developer would have to comply with. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dewey, can you come to the microphone?
My name is John Dewey. I live at 105 Scarborough Avenue, and my prepared remarks were kind of tossed out the window by being here and listening to the discussion in person. So I apologize if I seem a little bit wandering around to make sure I make all my points. Before I begin a little bit of discussion, I would like to thank Mr. Hutt and the property owners for attempting to answer homeowner questions. Regrettably, though, Mr. Hutt, your attempt to allay my anxiety only served to heighten it. And the reason I'm at a heightened level of anxiety, even after those comments, is that there are more than one property in Rehoboth that are in exactly this same situation. I'll name two that I know of directly, the Belmore and the former Walls Apartments. Both of those properties are across multiple zones. In the case of the Belmore, they're across 3 zones: Christian, C3, Bayard, C1, Philadelphia, R1. Walls' 2 zones: Christian, C3, Philadelphia, Scarborough, R1. So decisions that are made by this planning commission relative to this property have the potential for causing additional developers to come to this same body and ask for equitable treatment, leading towards additional intrusion into the residential zone. I get it. The property on Rehoboth Avenue needs to be redeveloped. I've lived here a long time. I've been wondering what's going to happen to that building. Something needs to give, something needs to change. I've been on Scarborough Avenue since 1996. We bought it knowing there was a commercial property across the street from us, the former Walls Apartments. We checked the zoning before we signed the papers on it. The ground on Scarborough Avenue is R1. We were assured if the function of that property ever changed, if those buildings ever came down, the only thing that could occur would be for homes to be built. It would have to meet the current zoning requirements. So we bought our home based on that information. Others in the previous meeting made similar comments that individual homeowners have made significant financial commitments to the city based on zoning maps. Mr. Hutt spent quite a bit of time apparently doing research, and it was valuable and important information. It is unclear how that one section of the 330 parcel came to be zoned as R1, and that may never in fact be clarified. Recognizing that, I would like to put out there that it's the city's responsibility to make sure that the zoning maps reflect what the city's vision for the properties are. I have to, as a homeowner, have to work from the assumption that the city's vision based on the map was for that R1 section of that parcel to be, should there be significant change in usage or buildings come down, R1. I would hope that the city would have the same viewpoint towards the property formerly known as Walls regarding the lots on Scarborough Avenue. At some point, the Belmore is going to be in front of the commission asking for significant renovations of that property. Any decision the Planning Commission makes has the risk of setting further dominoes in play that will increase the pressure on our residential neighborhoods and, in fact, may significantly change the character of our residential neighborhoods. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dewey. And then we can go to Mr. Keys if he's available.
Hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, hi, thank you. First, let me thank the commissioners for allowing me to speak. And I'd just like to say I'm an owner as well as the president of Scarborough Village Association of the condominiums that back up to the proposed hotel. I also own a individual single-family house right in back of the proposed hotel as well. So I have a significant financial interest in what goes there and what doesn't go there. However, there's a couple of problems that I see. One is if we give them an exception to say build the hotel and we don't change the zoning, we're still creating the same thing that we would do with any other proposed application in the future of any other hotel or Walls Apartments or anything else. We would still open up ourselves to either we give them an exception or we change the zoning. I think it's unfair to give them an exception. I think we need to change the zoning to allow the hotel to be built. I have talked to many residents in Country Club Estates. I know quite a few residents. I walk my dog everywhere, talk to all the neighbors. A lot of them are in favor of the hotel. It could be put on that residential lot. We could have 5 single-family houses there with pools that would really destroy the character of our neighborhood with the amount of noise that comes from it. I believe Ms. Gallo is a very open person. I've approached her to ask questions. She was very honest. She was very forthcoming. She gave me, all of the information I needed to make my decision. I totally trust her as a businesswoman in the community that she will do the right thing. She has a financial interest in the neighborhood, even though she doesn't live here in our neighborhood. She sells houses here. And she has a very well-established business. And if she doesn't do the right thing, it would affect her business as a real estate owner. I'm all for the hotel. Right now, we have been looking at a building that has been run down, that is deteriorating, that has animals crawling in and out of the roof. It's been an eyesore for years. No one has done anything to it. From the balconies of Building 6 of Scarborough Village, you can see it's disgusting. It's disgusting to look at. So I would urge the council members to go ahead and grant the zoning change and allow the hotel to be built in the character of Rehoboth. It's a gateway to Rehoboth. You turn down Rehoboth Avenue, that's really the first major intersection that you're running into, and right now it's disgusting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keys. So I'd like to say something now. I wrote a summary before we had this new information, so I'm going to change it a little bit. But what I'd like to get to is a point of, if not consensus, at least a direction so that we can give the applicant some clear indication of where we're going and ourselves about how we're going to get to a decision. So what I'd like to say is that the PC is going to find it very difficult to recommend a rezoning from residential to commercial in any part of the city without any limits to what could be built on the rezoned commercial property. We're just too small, too built out. Everything is going to have an impact. In this case, I was very happy to hear several things that the applicant said. One was the word equity, because I'm a firm believer that equity should be a part of every discussion about how commercial property is used. I know it's not the law, but it's kind of the way I view things. There are impacts that if they are considered, I think improve everything. So the shared property lines with both R1 and R2 zone properties add to the uniqueness of this parcel. So the challenges that the PC faced in May were that there are no controls on how the rezoning of the land will be operationalized to not harm the single-family and multifamily residents. Today, we heard from the applicant that they're considering how some of that operationalization might work, and I think that's beneficial for everyone to hear. The second point is, this is another procedural issue that I think it's unfortunate for everybody. The sequence of what should come first is not prescribed. The site plan review, the zoning, how does it all fit together? What happens first? What's the right order to get the decisions that are best for the community? And it appears, or it's been stated, that the Planning Commission cannot recommend limitations that would condition a zoning recommendation to a particular use by a particular development for a particular site plan. I think we heard that's correct, although I think we also heard, and we heard a proffer today, public information such as this can flow from the applicant back to the Planning Commission. So I just wanted to point that out. Another issue that hasn't been discussed, but will happen later in site plan review, and several people mentioned the Comprehensive Development Plan, the CDP. So right now, we do not have an impartial analysis of the impacts of the rezoning of a single property in this location on the neighborhood and the blocks in this vicinity. So an analysis could be produced by a professional urban planner and would give us a better indication of what the best use is of this property for the entire city. We have seen that in a very few short weeks, the applicant realized that the Board of Commissioners had changed the zoning to, I'll say, incentivize underground parking. What they did was make it not a penalty on the FAR. And this is a big area of land which can provide significant amounts of parking for the commercial district as well as for their own need. And I'm very happy that they recognized that and made some movements in that direction. So, but my problem is the neighborhood. So we're in a part of the town that there are many contributing resources of historical significance, at least in my view. There are many bungalows and there are many four-square buildings that are successfully adaptively reused. There are many other 1- and 2-story buildings. There's a 3-story motel, the redeveloped Dogfish Head properties. So does the expansion of the commercial zone along State Road to potentially allow a 4-story building where most properties are only 1 or 2 stories tall signal to the development community that this PC finds that higher impact redevelopment fulfills the vision of the CDP in this neighborhood? I think this needs more attention. And my concern is that the proposed rezoning signals the demise of the other remaining existing 1- and 2-story buildings, threatens buildings that I think have historic significance and really threaten the charm of these blocks. So these are all site plan review issues into the future, but I'm raising them now because I think the applicant has recognized and made significant changes to the rear of the building and possibly the scale of the building, and that the city needs new parking. We hear nothing about except the need for new parking. So I think we have a very attentive development team here, but I don't know how we get to the next step. I mean, I'd like to hear from members of the Planning Commission if anybody thinks they could formulate a motion to reach a decision today, or should we engage this group at a future meeting with more discussion? So I'll stop there. Okay, I saw Mr. Bryan and then Mr. Strange.
My request, my motion would be to have this continued for further discussion by the commission. We just heard this new information today, and it's going to take some time for that to be assimilated and understood, particularly the impact of it or the lack of impact of it. So I personally would not be in a position to vote today. I'd like to have some more time. I'd like to hear the rest of the commission members give their thoughts as well once they've had time to consider what came in and what didn't come in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryan. Other hands? Mr. Strange and then Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Jeff. And I agree with Mike Bryan's assessment. And Jeff, I thank you for your very good articulation of the difficulty of this one. We don't have a site plan to review. Mr. Hutt and his clients have made a proposal which does require going to the Board of Adjustment. But they're going to have the similar dilemma that we have, even if we have more information. I would just like to quote one item from 270-74, their powers C, just the last part of it. It says, provided that such relief may be granted without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of any zoning ordinance, code, regulation, or map. This is a tough nut, and it's a tough property. And it isn't intuitively obvious what is, quote, the long-term solution for the integrity of Rehoboth Beach, and poses many issues. And as you can see from the committee, we all have some differing perspectives on that. It's an extremely difficult issue. Due to all the things that you really presented very well, Jeff. And I'm not sure if at this stage, and I guess Mr. Hutt, on behalf of his clients, can do whatever he wishes as to whether his next step might be to go to the Board of Adjustment. But that in turn may still go in a circle. So this requires, I think, much more investigation and a much more explicit plan, because at the current time, we don't have a site plan to review, because the old one is no longer the one that is being used as the primary plan. And so without a site plan, we have really nothing to discuss further. Now it's just all general informational for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kaufman.
First, I agree with Mike Bryan, and I would support his motion, but I have some thoughts and observations to make. My first thought is that, good planning does not require the adoption of the aerial photograph. If you do that, ultimately, you're just going to go backwards. Good planning requires vision. It requires, as we're going to have, a new comprehensive development plan, which envisions the evolution of the city into the 21st century. My second thought is that if you rezone this property, it is not a precedent for all other properties or developers to come in with commercial zoning. No particular one zoning is a precedent. Certainly it makes a change, but it's not a precedent. My next thought is with regard to what Mr. Covenant, which Barry Covenant said concerning the variances. Again, I really do not like variances. They're very arbitrary. And one problem with what Mr. Covington said is that if you don't rezone it, and they did go the variance route, they couldn't utilize, and one of the main purposes, I think, of their application is to utilize the potential density that would come off of rezoning the whole property. So they couldn't achieve the hotel that they want to achieve through variances because they wouldn't have the necessary square footage. So that's a problem. I really do, and I appreciate what Glenn said. No, we cannot require them or condition them to a particular use. But the use of a covenant or proffer, which is voluntarily put in by an applicant, is legally appropriate. And in this case, since they've never indicated they would do anything but a hotel. And the only reason they haven't proffered that specifically is that I guess there could be a sale. I really think that they need to think about that further before we go on. I mean, for us to just agree to postpone this won't change any of that. It really would be up to the applicant after this to decide whether they want to come back to us or whether they want to go directly to the commissioners. In that event, it wouldn't be with a recommendation from us. And I think it would be better if we could reach a recommendation. So I'll stop with that, but I certainly appreciate what everyone has said. And I certainly would support a motion by Mike Bryan. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Weber?
Yeah, I agree with Mike as well, that I think we're going to need more time on this. I think that, rezoning from R1 to commercial it's a big ask. I don't know, I don't know specifically, but I've never heard of it happening in the city before. There's a lot of benefits that go along with that. And I just haven't seen, I haven't seen a plan yet that kind of compensates for those benefits. And I don't know whether the plan is to, the density up to Rehoboth Avenue State Road and have a much bigger setback in the back. I just haven't seen a Eureka plan yet that this plan really deserves support because of a lot of the things you talked about, Jeff. And I've worn the other hat of a developer. I know how expensive it is to do these plans, and I know how frustrating it is when you're asked to visit them. It's tough, and I understand that. And I agree with Mike. I know of Mrs. Gallo and for years and years and years, and I know that she's a good citizen and is going to do the right thing. It's a very tough situation to rezone that and without having a concept and a plan that everybody can rally around and say, this is a really good solution for this quandary. I just haven't seen that yet.
Anyone else? So I think we heard from almost everyone that we're not ready to make a decision today. If I'm misspeaking, raise your hand and tell me. Or does anyone want to make a motion and that we would rezone or would not rezone? I heard nothing except that we need more time. So I think we can stay with that. So.
Jeff?
Oh, go ahead, Barry, please.
Sorry, we need more time to do what? I mean, it seems we have all the facts right now, and I'm just not sure, if for Mr. Hutton, his clients, I don't know where this leaves them. What are they supposed to do? I mean, it said that it sounds like you are in favor of changing the zoning. The variance doesn't look like it is necessarily going to work either. That we can't put restrictions on the deed. It has to come from the applicants. It's just a lot of balls up in the air right now. So I'm just not sure what we're continuing.
Yeah, and thank you. You got to where I was trying to go faster. I appreciate that. But let's hear from Mr. Ellison, and then I'll make a proposal.
Well, in all fairness to the owners, I believe that now understanding, at least in my mind, that some restrictions by virtue of a covenant could be proposed by the owner. I would suggest that one of the elements of finding out more between this meeting and the next would be to hear exactly what Mr. Huff and the clients and his clients would offer. I think that would enlighten us quite a bit, see how far we could go with that as a part of our getting all the information we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Ellison. That's a good segue. Mr. Hutt, we'd like to turn to your team, and based on our intake and the public's intake of the information that you presented today, do you have feelings or thoughts about the process and the next steps? Would you like to come back, I guess I'm asking?
I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the process is on this. I don't know that the city's code or charter provides any greater sense of process on this as far as number of hearings, number of meetings, when you get back to the Board of Commissioners. Certainly, as was reflected in some of the last comments that we heard, every commercial project, any residential project, any project, there's a time value to working expediently, and that obviously translates into dollars as well. Ultimately, as was indicated in a number of the comments, the property is large. It serves as offices for Limitless, but certainly that's not the best utilization. I think everybody would agree that the property could be put to more use than it presently is experiencing. So I'm not sure exactly what the process is or what part of the process my clients are confirming or not confirming at this point.
Okay, fair enough. One moment.
I don't have a lot to offer. I mean, I guess.
So, okay. So I just wanted to see if you did have anything.
Well, there's no time limitation upon the Planning Commission in making a recommendation. I think what Mr. Hutt is saying is, at some point this process needs to wrap up so they can go to the next step, which is, the actual ultimate decision maker being the Board of Commissioners. So, but it sounds like, as you've gotten to, that the Planning Commission doesn't seem to be ready to make a decision yet. So the proper approach here would be to either defer it to a future meeting, take a motion to recommend approval or not, or to send it back to the commissioners and say we were unable to make a recommendation.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty good advice from Mr. Mandelis, and we've heard a number of, because we don't have an exact written process for something with this degree of difficulty. Perseverance, patience, making progress in leaps and bounds, or maybe no progress, can be frustrating for everyone. So, I mean, we could take a vote today. I have no objection to taking a vote today if someone would like to make a motion, and we could see what happens, or alternatively, we could tell the Board of Commissioners at this point in time that we've had extensive public comment, we've had deliberation, we've had movement from the development team, but we don't have the tools we need to get to a decision at this point in time. So we could stop and let folks move on, or we could continue. Mr. Covington again, please.
Yeah, let me suggest that maybe we continue this for 30 days, only to give Mr. Hutt and his clients the opportunity to come back with their thoughts after they sit down and discuss it. If they don't come back with any additional information or any additional proffers, that at the next meeting we go ahead and take a vote on either recommending, not recommending, or, not to the commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. Ms. Macha, Mr. Kaufman, and then Mr. Strange.
Well, I want to ask this, and maybe this is a process issue, Glenn, but is it unrealistic to think that we could possibly see a design in both models, right, with or without this change? And that would give us more information and be better informed before we either turn this away or make a vote.
So a couple comments. I guess if you're asking the the applicant to come back with 2 alternative designs. I'm sure that his response, and I'll allow him to say it, is that, those are design dollars to prepare 2 different options, and that may not be a cost that his client is, desirous of taking on right now. It certainly would give you more information. The other comment I guess I would make is, again, the zoning decision really should not be attached to any specific design. And remember, if this will come to you again, so you'll have, while you don't have the opportunities to apply conditions to a zoning decision, so you can't approve the rezoning with conditions, you will have an opportunity to attach conditions to a site plan that comes before you. So there will be that opportunity at some point. Go ahead.
No, and I actually remember you saying that last month when we got together in May. So, I mean, with that, I guess I'm not really seeing a reason why we don't make a decision here so we can let the owners take that next step, whatever that is.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaufman?
Well, first of all, I appreciate everybody's considered thoughts on this. I'm in agreement with Barry and with Mike that we should continue it for 30 days. But I think the applicant needs to realize that we need something further in order for us to make a recommendation of approval. So if that's not going to happen in 30 days, we need to know that. And if it comes back with just where we are, I think it's very unfortunate that we would have to send this back to the commissioners without a decision. I feel that that would be a bit of an abdication of our responsibility, which I don't want to do. But on the other hand, I'm really not in favor of voting against this either, because I do think that this property needs to evolve and be in a better place than it is today. So I'll support a motion to continue it for 30 days, but I really think the applicant needs to, excuse what I'm about to say, fish or cut bait here, and either come back to us with something that we can agree with, or realize this is going to go back to the commissioners at best with no decision. I mean, I believe we need to be upfront about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Strange, I think you had something?
Yes, thank you. And I agree with most of what Steve just said, but I would take a little bit different tact. And that is that rather than a continuance, I think we should reject without malice this application. And the reason I say that is that gives the applicant the ability to move forward by virtue of going to the Board of Adjustment, which is going to face the same questions and the same issues. We will ultimately have the ability to review this based on site plan review. But that assumes that some kind of decision was made by the Board of Adjustment, which they have very explicit criteria of whether or not they will permit a rezoning. And there is some circular logic going on here, and I don't think there's an easy way out of it, but subject to Glenn's considered opinion, it seems that if we reject this without malice, that we appreciate that this is really a dilemma. It also then allows the applicant to move much faster than spending more money and waiting and cycling, and gives them a very explicit path forward.
Okay, with that, Mr. Hutt, I'm going to go back to you one more time. And, well, maybe not just one more time, but I guess what I'd like to know is that, does your group have any opposition to us moving forward with the 30-day period that we just heard from several members? Is that an option you would like to see on the table or not?
Thank you, Mr. Trunzo. And yes, the 30-day option, I think, was first mentioned by Mr. Covington, and then I think Mr. Kaufman sort of seconded that unofficially, I guess. Yes, that would be acceptable to my acceptable option to be on the table at this time. If I may take one quick detour,
please.
Mr. Trunzo. There's been some talk about going from here right to the Board of Adjustment. And that would be a very difficult proposition. I'm not sure what we would have in front of the Board of Adjustment at this time. There would be a considerable amount of time spent by the team that's here and their professionals, and Mr. Janis and his professionals, even perhaps the new member who I heard at the beginning of the meeting just joined the building and licensing staff, so welcome to him. But there would be quite a discussion that went on about what variances are necessary and how you apply the code. And I know I've made that argument before, but that's not an easy, as to what goes to the Board of Adjustment, that would be the first threshold question that Mr. Janis and his staff, and that would likely involve the design professionals on my side, as well as certainly myself and Mr. Mandalis, trying to decide what issues even go to the Board of Adjustment. I just note that because it's not as though this turns around and goes directly to the Board of Adjustment based on what you've seen here, or any of the concepts that have been shown.
Okay,
Super, that's helpful. Well, go ahead, Mike, one more brief comment, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hutt. I mean, that's a very critical point here, is that notwithstanding, even if we didn't meet today, you still have several weeks of work that you're going to have to expend, regardless of what ultimately decisions may be made by us or the Board of Adjustment or anyone else. Essentially, you have a lot more engineering on the table to be completed to present plans in a sufficient detail that represents a site plan review submission. That is correct?
Certainly, there's been no final engineering done on the project.
Okay. And I think based on all the questions we've raised, that's going to impact some of what they're doing, and it's going to impact some of what we're doing. It's a very non-trivial question we're facing.
Good. Thank you, everyone. I certainly agree with what everyone said mostly, and with Mr. Kaufman, I don't think we should abdicate our responsibility. Even if the answer is difficult to get to, we do want to go back to the Board of Commissioners with an answer, and this certainly helps everyone to see our deliberation. So I'm wondering if I can go back to Mr. Bryan, Mr. Covington. Can you all cooperate on a motion so that we can get the 30 days and release these nice people?
Go ahead, Mike, I'll let you do it.
The motion would be simply to continue this matter for a period of 30 days and to see what the applicant does or does not bring forward for our consideration.
Okay, thank you,
I
Mr.
will
Bryan.
second that motion.
And we have a second from Mr. Covington. All in favor of that motion, please say aye. Oh, I'm sorry.
So the question I have about the motion is are you placing an affirmative obligation upon the Planning Commission to make a decision at that 30-day meeting?
No.
Or is this just a straight continuance?
It's a straight continuance.
Okay.
Something may come up, Glenn, that would require even more thought and consideration. Something may surprise this group. If it doesn't, well, I suspect at the end of 30 days, there will be a vote.
Okay.
Okay.
I just have one comment too, that this is for the applicants. I think, at least for me, and I think probably quite a few of us on the board, they were all pretty much in agreement that something has to be done with the building on Rehoboth Avenue. And for it to continue to sit like it does is an eyesore. And so we're hopeful that we can get something done to replace that existing building.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. So can we now vote on the motion? Everybody ready? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstains? Okay, the motion passed. Thank you, Mr. Hutt and your team. We appreciate the effort and the great amount of time you put in today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman, would you like to say something?
Could we take a 5-minute break?
We can take a 5-minute break. In fact, I welcome that. Thank you. I've had Mr. Dewey stand there. Okay. Okay, so I think we have all of the Planning Commission back, and I'd like us, in the interest of time, I'd like us to move on to new business. And for A, we have preliminary review of a minor subdivision. And this is for property located on Lake Avenue. So I'm going to go quickly. I'm not going to read everything I intended to say, but Mr. Dukes and his team, I'm sure, will cover some of it. So minor subdivision review is described by the Rehoboth Beach Code in Section 236. Specifically, Section 236-8.1, Procedures for Consideration of Application. The purpose of the preliminary review, today we're doing preliminary review, is described under Section 236-8.1B. And that's what we're going to do today. So, Mr. Dukes, are you and your team ready to proceed?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. We can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, this is an application by my clients, and on the public record, of course, you can see the from the deeds, it's identified as PNSDE Lake LLC. Basically, that's the ownership of Peter A. Davis.
I think Mr. Dukes is having some feedback, so I think he's working on that.
Mr.
And
Dukes,
Jeff,
can
you
you
have
hear
no
us?
video either?
Yeah, he put himself, there was a loud feedback, and he put himself on mute. I think they...
But what about the video part of it?
Oh, thank you.
I didn't
Yeah,
see
yeah,
it.
I can ask him to turn on his video. Thank you, Barry. I didn't even think to ask that. Thank you. I believe Max is helping him now.
I'm trying to. He's not responding.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Dukes, can you hear us?
Or any better now?
No, sir. You have another device that has audio on in your room. We're getting a severe echo and it's feeding back.
Yeah. Let's try this one then.
There's a second sign-in for Tunnell, for the law firm. Is there a person on that one?
Try this. Is this any better?
That is much better.
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Okay.
Do you want to turn on your video, Mr. Dukes, or no?
I'll try it. This is a new computer I borrowed from my partner.
Okay,
We'll see how that works.
that's fine. You can continue either way.
Okay. You can try it.
We can see you.
Basically,
Congratulations.
Susan and Peter are owners of the property in Rehoboth. They already own 35 Maryland Avenue. In fact, they were there until this morning and they had to fly back to Montana. Susan and Peter have a minor league baseball team, so they're very active. They already own 35 Baltimore or Maryland Avenue, and they live out of state right now. They are presently in Montana, and Susan and Peter have purchased the 3 lots there. And if you know the neighborhood, you'll see the lots are now vacant. They tore the houses down. Their goal is to take a lot, and each lot is 50 by 100 feet. And you'll see in the exhibits that I proposed or that I prepared there that their surveys show 50 by 100 feet. So each of them is 5,000 square foot lots. Susan and Peter would like to go ahead and combine the 3 lots into 2 lots. So you'd have a 75 by 100 square foot. They would like to have that so they can have more landscaping. And also they can have a little bit of space between the Stingray, or we used the old Bob Ching's restaurant building there, the Stingray. So they could have a space there. Also, the reason why they want to build there, not stay in 35 Maryland Avenue, is they have a handicap issue in the family, and they like to have downstairs bedroom, and they like to have 2 downstairs bedrooms when they build these houses. The lots are presently zoned C3, which is, it's commercial, but they're using these for residential purposes. They want 2 residential homes. The houses will be and have been designed by Hughes Studio Architects in Seattle, Washington. The Turnstone Builders are the ones that are proposing to do the construction. And for what it's worth, the previous 3 structures that were there before they were demolished did have rental licenses. That's basically, that is all we have to say initially. I'm open to any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dukes. So the agenda, I should have had number 2, the Chief Building Inspector. Can I call upon you to give your report, assessment, or add anything that you'd like to add to your report?
Certainly. Would you like me to read the whole thing or just kind of paraphrase?
Summarize it, please.
Certainly. So as Mr. Duke said, the plan is to basically join the 3 lots together and separate them by a line, a new line proposed to divide the parcel with a bearing of north 40 degrees, 54 minutes, 22 seconds west, with a distance of 167 feet. All structures that existed previously on these 3 lots are now completely removed, and the land sits barren. In respect to the tree code, there are currently 16 trees located on lots 63, 65, and 67. After the separation occurs, parcel A will have 0 trees, and parcel B will contain the 16 trees that are basically on the 3 lots right now, or excuse me, on lot 67. With that being said, if separation occurs, trees, the tree code would have to be recognized, and of course all building code for all proposed structures, none of which has been applied for as of yet, would have to meet current ordinances.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Janis.
Yes, sir.
So to the Planning Commission, as you know, I didn't say this earlier, but the purpose of the preliminary review is to make sure the application is substantially complete and accurate. And of course, we're going to receive input from adjoining property owners and the public who've been notified. And yeah, everything that's under B. B1, A, B, C, and D. So does anyone have any comments or questions for the applicant or the building inspector? Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I just had a comment for Hal on behalf of his clients. It's nice to see, in this case, commercial properties being upzoned to residential, but even if that wasn't the case, the only time we see larger properties, they're always being split up into smaller properties. And it's very nice to see these 350 by 100 lots, they're going to end up being 75 by 100 lots. And I think there's an object lesson in there somewhere, but thank you. I think, and I read through the entire application. It is substantially complete. And I think that we should go, eventually, after the others have made comments, we should vote in favor of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Strange. Anyone else? I have a question for the chief building inspector. Now I assume there are 3 curb cuts. I know we're not doing site plan review, but that's something that we'll see when plans are submitted. I assume 2 lots, 2 curb cuts, or it could be anything, whatever they propose. I just wasn't clear on what would happen.
That is correct. Once they apply, we'll evaluate all the application documents and ensure, maintaining of the ordinance, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other concerns? Does anyone see anything that is missing? Okay, I'll ask it another way. Do we think the applications are complete and we can advance them to site plan review next month?
Yes.
Public hearing, thank you. Use the right words, okay. Would someone like to make a motion? Mr.
I move that
Strange.
we accept the plan as submitted.
Okay.
I second it.
And we have a second from Mr. Bryan. Okay, so the motion is that we accept the plan. Preliminary review is complete.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff, is there any
Mike's-
public comment?
Mike's waving his hand for you, but his mic's off. Mike Bryan's waving his hand at you.
Mike Bryan, I'm sorry. Did I overlook you? Go ahead.
Mike, you're
Your mic's off, Mike.
Okay,
Now it's off again.
how about now?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, do you need to call to ask if there's any adjoining property owners or the public to comment before you vote?
Yes, we should do that. I was looking at the list now, and
That was my question. I just thought maybe you might want to do that first.
yeah, we do. There is no one in the room, and well, actually, there is no one online either. Yeah, so thank you for recognizing that. So there are no members of the public present to comment. Okay, so where does that take me? Oh, we're back to the motion. So the motion is to that the application is complete and will advance to public hearing. Any other discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That looks like everybody. Any opposed or any abstentions? None. Okay, so that passes. Thank you, Mr. Dukes. We appreciate your participation remotely. We know it has its challenges.
Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.
So we presume, Mr. Dukes, that you'll be on the next regular planning commission's agenda for a public hearing. Do we know that date so we can give it to him? That date.
We can get that
July
date.
9th.
July 9.
There's Ann, just when you need her, July 9th. Thank you, Ann. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dukes.
Yeah.
All righty.
It's interesting with this particular application that we'll end up, regardless of the configuration, with at least 1 and possibly 2 additional parking spaces downtown.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was just curious about with the curb cut. So we'll see it when we see it, or the building inspector will see it. Okay, thanks, everybody. So let's move on to new business B, election of the vice chair. This is part of the agenda that I'm particularly excited about. So the notification was given to the PC within 15 days as required. And I just wanted to cover a few things from the bylaws. Remember that members serve from the date on which their appointment or reappointment is confirmed, or until they are reappointed or their successor is appointed and they are confirmed. That's not so important for the vice chair, but there's been a lot of questions. There've been a few questions about when terms expire. So you're basically, while there are goals, I think, by the mayor to get people to keep a calendar going in that September, October timeframe, that, you know, depending on how the days fall and the meetings fall, it doesn't always happen. So there, you have an appointment date. You don't have an expiration date of your term, but it's until the next person is named, just so that's clear. So as we know, the vice chair is a very important position. They have a lot of responsibility. They are to fill in for the chair when the chair is not available. And should there be a succession issue, the vice chair automatically ascends to the chair position. So when we had the resignation of Mr. Patterson, the vice chair, of course, due to COVID and all kinds of other things, I thought we would have another member to the Planning Commission seated a little bit quicker, a little bit more quickly than was done. But at any point, I still think we will have a 9-member Planning Commission very, very shortly. But I didn't want to delay this any longer, because if I should get hit by a bus tomorrow whenever I leave here, I wouldn't want to leave everybody in any more chaos than you are under my direction. So we're trying to do good here. The bylaws state that the election is going to be conducted in a way that does not have any adverse effects on collegiality. We had the nomination process. We received 2 nominations, Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Bryan, both of which are very well qualified individuals, have been extremely helpful to me, both behind the scenes with setting the agenda and doing such things, as well as just the normal advice about things that happen. So I appreciate their service. I feel very comfortable with both of them. And Mr. Kaufman shared with me, and I shared with all of you, that while he's very happy to serve, he would withdraw his nomination in favor of Mr. Bryan. So we basically have one nominee. So I'd like to invite Mr. Bryan to say anything, and then we will hold a vote. And I'll ask Mr. Kaufman to. He raised his hand first. Well, why don't you go first, Mr. Kaufman?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. First of all, I greatly appreciate the nomination, and I feel very honored by it. Unfortunately, because of other responsibilities I have right now, I don't feel that I would be able to provide the time and energy necessary to support Jeff, and given the very extensive program of things that we're going to have to address this coming year, that it would be not right for me to accept the nomination. But I really am honored by it, and I wanted to say that I fully support Mike Bryan. I think he'd be a great vice chair. And the last thing is, not that this makes a whole lot of difference, but Mike was appointed by the current mayor, and I think that's important, and that it's a good thing for an appointee from the current mayor to be the vice chair. So that's where I'm at, and I want to thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Those are very generous comments. Mr. Bryan?
Yes, I think they were too generous. I would like to give Steve the opportunity to submit his nomination again at this moment. Because
Never wet.
But I do see that in my view of it is that the vice chair supports the chair and works collaboratively with all of us as we do currently. So this is really not just a single effort. It's a joint effort, because we do have a whole lot coming in the pipeline. And to the extent I can be helpful, I'm glad to do that. If someone else wants to take that position, that's fine with me as well. I'd be glad to support them.
Wonderful. Thank you for those remarks. So, Mr. Secretary, I believe we do elections with a roll call vote. And are you prepared to do a roll call? Do you have a list in alphabetical order? You're still on mute, sorry.
Yes, I do have it in alphabetical order.
Okay, so I would like I would like you to call the roll in alphabetical order, and then the chair last, if that's okay with you. And I guess we are ready to vote on the nomination of Mike Bryan for vice chair.
Well, the first one alphabetically is Mike.
This could be awful.
Well, this could direct the rest of the votes.
What if I vote no?
If you want to go last, I'll give up my spot.
Mr. Covington.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman.
Yes.
Ms. Macha.
Ms. Macha has had to leave the meeting temporarily, sorry.
Okay. Mr. Strange.
I vote yes.
Myself, I vote yes, and Mr. Trunzo.
I vote yes. Okay, Mr. Bryan, congratulations. You're elected vice chair.
Thank you. Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, right?
I'm just glad that you wish for it. Thanks, and congratulations. And really, this is I know I may complain occasionally to individuals about the amount of responsibility, but really, it's a super honor to do this kind of work on behalf of the city and all the residents and the businesses. And you know, I know everybody takes it seriously, and we really do excellent work. So I'm proud of what everybody does here. Thank you. So now we have general citizen comments, and we don't have anyone left for general citizen comments. So we're going to move on to item number 9, other business, and we have the building inspector's report. And do you want me to just ask if folks have any questions, or you want to give a report?
Certainly. Yeah, go ahead and ask questions. If anybody has one, please fire away.
Okay, so they distributed a very nice report for this month. I had a chance to look it over. I'm sure many of you did. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Janis?
No, it's very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to make one comment that I know you received the report for today's lot, the minor subdivision here, not really in a timely fashion. Just let you know in the future, you will get these reports a little more timely. Just with everything going on here and the lack of help, delayed the report coming out a little bit. But going forward, you'll have ample time to review the report on future notices.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're glad to hear you have more hands and things are looking up. That's super.
Yes, thank you.
So the city solicitor's report, do you have anything for us?
Mr. Chair, I don't have anything to report. I would report on Clear Space and Rehoboth Spotlight, but I see that's under yours. So when we get to it, let's just talk about it then.
Okay. Okay, updates from the chair. First, I'll announce that I have been contacted by the principals of the Bellhaven Hotel, and I'm sure others in the city have been contacted as well. They are still waiting for the, I'm forgetting the acronym, the floodplain thing that will allow them to build.
FEMA.
The letter of map amendment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're still waiting for the correspondence. I don't think they have, I know they don't have the correspondence that says that they can build the underground parking, but that's what they're waiting for. And they are assuming a timeline that they could be able to submit to the city in early July and be on our agenda in August. So we're already pretty far in June and they don't have the letter. I don't know what the likelihood of that happening is or is not, but that is their current timeline. So I just wanted folks to know that that conversation had occurred. City planner, there's a lot been happening with city planner. There's a lot of discussions going on. I know the Board of Commissioners has had a discussion. Based on feedback I've received, folks would like to know what the Planning Commission wants a planner to do. So to get that discussion going, we ask for some input from everyone. We've put a kind of draft work tool document together that starts to describe how the planner would support the Planning Commission. I like how it's coming along. I've added some material from the CDP and tried to focus it, put some historic contents about how long this need for a planner to engage has been discussed. I don't think there's any opposition everywhere. People are really wanting to understand how to operationalize it optimally for all the different city staff, for the PC, for the Board of Commissioners, for the city manager, you know, how this is going to work. I don't think we can answer all those questions, but I think we can give guidance about what our perspective is and how we would find it useful. I'd like to schedule a discussion in July to have a public discussion about what we've put together so far and try to get to a consensus or at least a final version that we could put forward to the mayor. And I just wanted to see procedurally how comfortable people are with that. Any thoughts? Mr. Bryan, your hand is up.
Yes, I thought this is a well-done document. And I particularly liked, it highlights what we had just had problems with the 330 Rehoboth rezoning. If we had the help of someone that we described here, I think it would really be greatly beneficial to us as the commission. And particularly their rapport and their communications with the applicant. I just think it would really help the whole process and distill it down for us to make the bigger decisions that we're tasked with making, rather than worrying about a 5-foot green space or a 10-foot setback or something of that sort. I'd much rather have that decided by a professional and then recommended to us one way or the other.
I think that's a great anecdotal report. And I should have said earlier, I apologize. Mr. Weber has done all the work on compiling all the comments, and you know, he's done a great job with editing and refocusing. So I'd like to give him a chance to go now, or we can listen to other comments first, whichever is better for you all. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Kaufman.
Just before, number one, I was about to say what you said about Lee. I think he did a great job putting it together. And I think it's a great document. Only one comment, there was a part in there that talked about who the planner would be responsible for, either the Planning Commission or the Board of Commissioners. I believe it would be both. He would advise both the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. And then my only other thought is that I'd like to, if it agrees, put this out for the public to see before we talk about it in our July meeting, you know, so we get some comments on it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that I was implying in July that it would be a linked, distributed document for the public to comment on. Well, I do think we absolutely need to do that. Okay, Mr. Ellison, please.
Yeah, I also think Lee has done a very good job. My own sense is that, you know, the planner should report directly to the mayor and commissioners, because that is the group that really has responsibility for eventually approving the CDP and for overseeing the activities of all of the other commissions, the BOA and so on. So I feel fairly strongly about that. Obviously, I don't know how that decision will be made, but that is just my feeling. The only area where I feel that the language is still a little bit deficient is in the notion that I have, the planner really would bring the kind of thing that Mike Strange was talking about earlier about the 330 project, and that is we tend to all, focus on the particular issue or the particular project that we're looking at the moment, rather than looking at it necessarily in the much broader context, not only of the CDP, of the neighborhood and the CDP, but I think the planner would also bring a much larger context from the thinking of the planning profession as a whole. And I think we all understand that is what we're talking about, but I think, Lee, the language could be strengthened a little bit in that sense. But otherwise, I think it's a terrific job.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Anyone else? Lee, would you like to say anything?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, I think the purpose of the document was to, or the purpose of it is to just kind of highlight the issues as the various planning commission members see them, provide a short background and an example of the situation that we're in and how things are currently processed, and then to build a case as to why we need a professional planner, what types of tasks we would see them doing, and then going into more implementation. How are we going to find this person? How are we going to, who's going to be responsible for finding them? How are we going to vet them and that type of thing, and then just with some of Mike Strange good advice, the type of skills and so this is really just kind of a working document to kind of bring the issues to the forefront with the other planning commission members, and once it's released to the public.
You're dropping out, Lee.
Yeah.
Am I dropping out?
Yeah, you missed a lot of that.
It's really a working document with the hope that it would bring the issues to the forefront for other planning commission members to comment on, as well as the public once we post it on the website.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, everyone. I think we heard from everybody that going to discussion at a public meeting in July is the way to go. And I think that's great. I think that's great timing and a great process. Thank you. So training programs will probably resume in July, or if not then August. I want to see how many agenda items we get for July 1st before I commit some people's time for that. And I think we may have this discussion item, Planning Commission regular start time. The city's gotten a lot of feedback that our start times are all over the place, and our standard start time has been traditionally 3 o'clock. The pandemic, threw that into a problem. We have to end at 4:30. I'm getting a lot of feedback that we really should have a new start time, whether it be 1 or 2 or whatever. But now that we have a vice chair, I want to start having a discussion about how we do that, and if we want to do that, and how we can get to a more consistent start time for all of our different constituents. So that's just sort of notification of you that I do want to do something about that this term.
Hey, Jeff, excuse me. If you lose me, it's because my battery life says I have 10%. Even though it's plugged in. So it's plugged in. I don't know why it's not charging, but just for information purposes.
Lucky for all of us, it's 4:10. We're almost done. Thanks for letting us know. And then I guess I'll defer to the city solicitor for an update on ClearSpace.
Sure. So the only thing to update there is that the 21-day submissions were due Wednesday. or yesterday? Wednesday. Wednesday. So there is a submission that's been made on behalf of the appellants. I've shared that with the chair, I believe. Neither ClearSpace, Spotlight, or the Planning Commission filed a substantive 21 days submission. Sort of those groups reserved till the 7-day submission. So the 7-day submission, which is the last submission that'll be filed before the hearing, which is on the 30th. It's my intention that the Planning Commission will make a submission at that time, responding to the first submission that's been submitted already by the appellants. But that hearing is currently scheduled for the 30th of this month.
Any questions about that? I assume that the appellant's submission is in the public docket, but I can send it via email tonight or tomorrow, one of the two, so everyone can easily access that if you're interested.
That would be good.
Okay, thank you. And then, Ms. Womack, any new applications which may have been submitted?
No new applications.
Okay, that's great. And so right now, we don't know who's going to come in July, but I'll be working very carefully with the vice chair to assemble the agenda, and you'll get updates from us about how that's happening. Does anybody have anything else they want to discuss today? Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Strange?
Just a question. Are we going to be in person in July, or are we going to be hybrid like we are now?
Thank you. So we are going to be, as of this time, we are going to be remote, virtual. Okay. Unless there's a change, unless there's a city policy change that says we must meet in person, the chair has the option of evaluating what the situation is and deciding what to do. I've been told that we cannot switch back and forth. Of course, today we had this blended model because of the notification for Lake Avenue, which was done quite correctly by Ms. Womack as an in-person meeting. That was the city policy as of June 1 at that point in time. But that gradually got rolled back with exceptions. So I have said we're staying virtual until there's a change of situation. And I've heard from various planning commission members that their in-person meetings are a problem, so we are staying virtual. And if I have the choice, I'd like to give 60 days notice before we change. I won't be in control of the city policy, but we'll follow city policy if and when we must go back to virtual. But for now, I don't anticipate that we will have to meet in person July or August. That's the best information I have at this point in time. But of course, the city can decide, almost anything. So we will be virtual in July. That was a long way of answering the question, wasn't it? Sorry, but I just wanted you to have just to know there's only certain things that I can control. Thanks. Was there a second question? Okay.
Not a question, Jeff. Just a point of information for the Planning Commission. There's a committee that's been meeting for several weeks on the Wilmington and Baltimore Streetscape Committee, of which there are no members of the Planning Commission on it, except I am as a citizen, and I'm not on the group that's meeting, but I participate as a citizen only, and it can only be heard verbally. But I've submitted voluminous documents to them, in which the committee has been exceedingly responsive to my recommendations. They got off, I think, on a very rocky footing because a consultant recommended by DelDOT, who's being paid by them, Rossi Engineering, came up with essentially a transportation solution to the Wilmington and Baltimore Avenue streetscapes, the four blocks bounded by the ocean, boardwalk, and 2nd Avenue, and completely missed the point, didn't address the symptoms, and came up with a solution that was completely inappropriate. And now it's starting to evolve more, that you would have had a charrette to get this started as opposed to the way it went. And I'm pleased to report to the Planning Commission that a lot more thought is taking place, and the mayor, who is the chair of the commission, is evolving more in terms of the designs that ultimately come about, that blend in much better with whatever what Rehoboth stands for, so to speak. So I just want to bring the committee up to date, and if you want, I'll draft something for the committee's review, but I can look at the city website and see the status of what has occurred with that committee. That's it, just informational only.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. And, you know, as we've been doing, keep me posted. The mayor also gives me updates. He's monitoring for any significant land use issues that would directly involve the Planning Commission. But of course, our role for the whole CDP, you know, there's folks that think that we should be there for now. So we are in dialogue about that and following along. So I don't feel like we're out of the process, but we're closely monitoring it. With that, I think we're done. I wanted to thank everybody today and for last week, for last month. The 330 Rehoboth Avenue has really kept me awake at night because you know, it's so nice when you can open a book and you can see exactly what you need to do and you can do a checklist. But in this case, there's a lot of issues, and there's been great discussion, very respectful discussion. You know, I'm very pleased that the applicants, I think, really absorbed quite a bit of the May observations and discussions. The neighborhoods are clearly explaining their concerns, and I feel like I don't love this process because it doesn't have a lot of definition, but I think this is really one of the more difficult things that we're charged with doing, and I do feel like we're making progress and it is beneficial. And I really do appreciate the PC members who wave their hands and say, you know, at some point, you know, the benefit reward, we have to put some time frames on it and we have to get to a point. And I think that's helpful for the entire community to hear that. So I'm very pleased that we're still listening and we're still giving guidance and changes are happening. So I think this is very challenging, and I thank all of you. I think we're doing a really good job with this one. Thank you. With that, shall we adjourn?
Yes.
I hear a motion from Mike Bryan to adjourn. A second? Okay, we got a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate all your participation.